COVID-19 has caused a seismic and possibly permanent shift in the world of work. It is estimated that up to 500 million jobs may be lost by the time the pandemic is over. 270 million workers are now living in extreme poverty, and even in many developed countries, food insecurity is rising. Meanwhile, these impacts are magnified for women in youth groups. But this in itself is nothing new, and in many ways these current trends reflect a crisis within a crisis. Even before COVID-19, a huge social deficit existed. Youth unemployment was increasing, and climate change, the elephant in the room, continues to threaten 1.2 billion jobs globally, almost 40% of the total workforce. The pandemic has therefore shone a lens on a problem that has long been bubbling away beneath the surface. It is this that has led the United Nations Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, to call on governments to prioritise investments in green jobs as part of a green recovery. My name is Colm Hastings from the Partnership for Action on Green Economy, and this is The Green Renaissance, a monthly podcast series designed to answer the key policy questions at the heart of the green recovery debate. The stakes have never been higher, so join us once a month as we unpack the complex policy issues that will determine the fate of our economies, our societies, and our planet for decades to come. Subscribe on SoundCloud, Spotify, and wherever you get your podcasts, and please give us a rating if you enjoy the series. In this episode, we speak to Mustafa Kamal Gueye of the International Labour Organization, Koudia Kane of the Ministry of Environment of Senegal, and Damien Lankwande of GRAD Burkina to discuss how a green recovery can address the global unemployment crisis. We ask them how governments can support green jobs development, why a green recovery must also be just and inclusive, and how targeted policies can promote new job opportunities for women and youth. So to begin with, we speak to Mustafa Kamal Gueye, who is the coordinator of the Green Jobs Programme at the International Labour Organization. Kamal leads the organisation's work to create more and better green jobs opportunities, and here he talks about how a green recovery can further advance this process.
Well, first of all, I think one important learning from the COVID-19 crisis is the interface between agendas of sustainable development in the sense of environmental sustainability, human health, decent work, and our economic systems. And the way we have to respond to the crisis, and that is the message we're seeing from countries around the world, is to connect these agendas. That the recovery from the COVID-19 crisis should not just be a return to business as usual. It must be a return to what, in the words of the ILO Director General, should be a better normal, so that we address some of the fundamental weaknesses in current economic and social systems and how they impact on the environmental sustainability agenda. So in that sense, a green recovery is in order, and because this is a job crisis, in recovering in the world of work, there are opportunities to create more and better jobs through environment-related actions.
So as we return, in your words, to a better normal, one important aspect will be ensuring that we protect those who stand to lose out under a green recovery, those whose jobs and livelihoods may be lost. This touches onto the need for a just transition. But how do we make this happen in practice and avoid this becoming just another slogan?
I believe that the response to the COVID-19 in the sense of a green recovery must also address issues of social justice. We see a number of countries trying to move into the energy transition, gradually going out of the fossil fuel-based economic and energy systems to an energy system which relies more on clean energy, for example. So this means phasing out from coal and policies in that direction. Now, obviously, in doing that, it is important to make sure that the opportunities for job creation are maximized, but at the same time, the risks of social disruption and loss of employment in existing economic sectors are minimized and mitigated, so that at the end of the day, we remain within the objectives of the 2030 agenda, which is to leave no one behind. Now, that notion of just transition is critical, because if we're not able to have a strong social consensus in the ecological transition, it is likely that forces of resistance, which might be powerful forces, may emerge, and this is not going to be optimal for the social and economic transformations that countries are seeking. So therefore, as countries embark on the green recovery, it will be important to keep in mind notions of social justice, and just transition is simply reflecting that effort to make sure that we maximize opportunities, minimize risks, and ensure that everybody is well off in this process of green recovery.
It's interesting that you just referred to forces of opposition that may eventually oppose green initiatives. I think one of those that certainly interests me and have a lot of power in this space is the trade unions. For example, in the United States, environmental protection and union jobs have been called a fault line. The Green New Deal is facing opposition in some quarters from those that are still pushing a jobs versus the environment narrative. So what role do you see for trade unions in advancing a green recovery? And how do we ensure that we have their support?
Well, a very good news is that, at least in the context of the International Labour Organization, the trade unions, the workers' organizations, they have been at the forefront of the sustainability agenda. I think workers' organizations have understood, perhaps more than others and before others, that there will be no jobs on a dead planet. We need to ensure that we keep the natural capital assets of our economic systems, which enable economic activity and employment creation. And so therefore, workers' organizations are not against an environmental sustainability agenda. They are for it. However, they want to see a comprehensive policy framework. And that is why in the ILO in 2015, our tripartite constituents with governments, workers, and employers representatives adopted what we call the guidelines for a just transition towards environmentally sustainable economies and societies for all. So those guidelines, they offer a comprehensive framework, looking at macroeconomic policies, sectoral policies, the role of social dialogue in this process of transition, labor market policies, and all what is needed to go together in a coordinated and coherent manner so that we mobilize all forces within society, governments, and social partners together to achieve this ecological transition. We have a clear indication that ambitious action for the environment is not going to be a job killer. It's the opposite. And actually, taking action for sustainability can deliver more and better jobs. So the ILO own assessment of implementing the Paris Agreement on climate change, even focusing only on the energy sector, found that it's possible to generate an additional 18 million net job gains by 2030. So therefore, we are on a positive narrative. What matters is the process that will take us through that narrative. And I think that's what workers as well as employees organizations want to see.
Would you also extend this to youth groups? One of the key themes that is emerging from these podcasts is the central role that youth must play in advancing a green recovery. Does this also apply to green jobs?
Absolutely. I think it's very clear that the Sustainable Development Agenda has at its core this notion of intergenerational equity. And I think we live today in a world where young people are the largest number of people on this planet. So it's just natural that they step up in securing not only their present and their future. And we see that youth groups in various forms are very supportive of this notion of green jobs, which is just finding a way of securing a livelihood, decent work, but which also matches their personal aspirations, which is to live in a planet which is safe, breathe a clean air, have clean water. So all these ecosystem functions that we take for granted, I think young people have got to the realization that they are fundamental to sustain the present and future of people on this planet. And I think that's why we're seeing this massive engagement of youth groups very much pushing and driving the agenda for green jobs.
To what extent is the development of green jobs opportunities a balance between the role of governments in creating the right policy and enabling environments and the role of the private sector in driving innovation and enterprise? Who should really be taking the lead here?
Well, I think that it's the natural role for governments to put in place the policy frameworks and the enabling conditions for all actors in society to play their role. So therefore, the sense of direction is in the hands of governments. But those who are going to be transforming our economic systems and societies, they are actors in the real economy. These are employers, workers, people, and young people, because they are, again, the majority of people around this world. So I think it's very clear. It's important to get this differentiation of roles very clear. governments must put in place policies, frameworks, and conditions that would make it possible for every other actor in society to play their part. And I think a lot of what we need in the ecological transition, including in the green recovery from COVID-19, will be about innovation. It will be about enterprise development, entrepreneurship. And these are areas where we see a lot of action by young people using information communication technologies to deal with environmental issues in very innovative ways that also create decent work and green jobs. And a lot of engagement of the private sector enterprises in that area of innovation as well. I think there is a fantastic opportunity, and it's just important for government to unleash these possibilities for other actors in society to fully play their part.
Speaking of different roles for different stakeholder groups, perhaps here we can talk about the role of women. Obviously, from a gender perspective, women workers have been hit particularly hard by the impacts of COVID-19, which has exacerbated already quite a large social deficit. How can we address this deficit through the promotion of green jobs?
Well, obviously, we have seen, even from our data, that women work in most of the sectors that have been hit hard by this crisis in the service industry. And it's important that gender dimension be kept in mind in the process of recovery. Now, when we look at gender in the opportunity side of the recovery in terms of where do we see jobs coming up, new occupations in the green sectors, in the energy sector, in the circular economy? We started with the assumption that many of these new economic sectors that are growing fast, where new occupations are coming, would possibly bridge the gender divide so that we would just see equal participation of male and female workers in those economic sectors. However, the trends we see from our analysis is indicating that it's not necessary and not automatically the case. We see that some of the occupations that are emerging both in the energy transition and in the circular economy tend to be in economic sectors and occupations that are currently predominantly engaging male workers. So which means that there still would be need for dedicated policies to ensure that we have a gender balance in the jobs of the green economy, and that it would not happen by default, but by design. There would be need for specific policies to encourage and support female participation in those economic sectors. And so that's a critical dimension. Now, there's a good news that if you look at the jobs in the renewable energy sector, the data from the International Renewable Energy Agency is telling us that we have a higher level of female participation in jobs in the renewable energy sector compared to females' participation in the fossil fuel industry. So it's a good news, but this trend needs to be reinforced so that we really achieve a gender balance in the jobs of the green economy.
We've obviously seen the world of work change quite dramatically over the past 12 months, and a green recovery is likely to have further disruptive impacts. One that is perhaps flying under the radar at the moment, but which I think is likely to develop as the world steps up its climate action, is the notion of a green gig economy, for instance, for those working in ecosystem restoration. How do we manage the potentially negative impacts of this type of work in the future?
Well, I think the new ways of working through the gig economy, for example, bring a positive side, which is that it enables workers who would normally be excluded from the labor market on account of disability or care responsibility, illness, etc., to be able to participate in the labor markets. Now, the challenge we face is how do we make sure that this change in the employment relationship is operating in a normative framework. International labor standards have been devised for decades to guide how work is done in a decent way, protecting workers, making conditions fit for enterprises and society as well. Now, how do we make sure that this is not fundamentally changed in a negative way through these new forms of work? An important slogan in the world of work is this notion that labor is not a commodity. Now, in the gig economy, it becomes very difficult to find some ways through which you ensure that this is not happening. So therefore, ensuring that working conditions in the gig economy comply with the notions of decent work, that workers have rights at work, they have their right for collective bargaining, and that it's very clear that we know that we are still in an employment relationship guided by labor standards. That's a challenge, and I think it's fundamental to keep that in mind.
As a final question, I wanted to ask you about your own personal experiences working with governments over the course of the past 12 months. What lessons have you taken from this? And are there any policy innovations or approaches that we can look to for inspiration?
Well, the ILO has been working with a framework where we work with our constituents to ensure that in this context, we maintain business continuity, where workers had to still work in the context of the pandemic, that we have safety at work and reviving the economy. Now, where I've seen very interesting ideas, because for me, one of the lessons of this crisis is that there is need for countries to be more resilient, economic systems, enterprises to be more resilient to future shocks, because this is a health-driven crisis, but it can tell us that the world may face similar crises, possibly related to the environment, to climate change, a possible collapse of the biodiversity and ecosystems, and what to do in response to that. But at the same time, I think it has revealed a fantastic opportunity to innovate and to respond to shocks. We have seen, for example, across Africa and many other parts of the world, how young people have devised innovative systems for touchless hand washing systems, often using recycled materials. We have seen how, with the breakdown in the supply chains for food, many countries and cities have gone on to promote further city-based farming, urban farming, and this has allowed organizations, the social economy, to venture in that area. And you take a country like Singapore, they've even gone to put specific policy objectives to promote urban farming so that they can ensure a higher part of their nutritional needs from locally produced food. And I think all these innovations are very positive and encouraging, and I think they offer some of the ways forward in recovering in a green, sustainable, and inclusive way, but at the same time pushing the boundary of the green economy beyond this crisis.
Next, we speak to Koudia Kane, who is a project manager at the Green Finance and Partnerships Department in Senegal's Ministry of Environment and Sustainable Development. Koudia is the focal point for Green Jobs projects, and here she explains why green jobs have been at the heart of Senegal's green economy transition.
Au Sénégal, ici, on a, disons, les autorités et même aussi les ONG ont essayé de faire le parallèle entre les besoins et les défis environnementaux. Donc, on a trouvé en fait que c'était beaucoup plus intéressant pour le pays d'intéresser les gens sur l'environnement en passant par la création de ressources et d'emplois, puisqu'il y a un problème énorme de chômage au niveau des jeunes au Sénégal. On a eu déjà tester la protection de l'environnement par le volontariat. Ça n'a pas trop marché. Il y a eu des résultats, mais ce n'étaient pas les résultats escomptés. Quand il y a eu cette avancée-là sur l'économie verte, c'était juste en fait une aubaine pour le pays de pouvoir contextualiser ces caractéristiques. Parce que ce qui nous caractérise ici, c'est qu'on a un chômage croissant, on a une raréfaction des ressources qui deviennent de plus en plus rares et on a aussi un problème par rapport aux importations. Le pays consomme beaucoup de produits qui viennent de l'extérieur. On parle d'emploi vert, donc on parle de durabilité dans l'économie locale. On parle d'une valorisation et d'une protection à la fois des ressources naturelles. On parle de secteurs nouveaux qui ne sont pas encore saturés, puisqu'on forme beaucoup de gens dans les universités qui sortent et qui ont du mal à trouver du travail. Donc, c'est pas pour rien que le président a mis en place ce fonds-là, l'ADER, sur l'entrepreneuriat, parce qu'on a compris que il faudrait maintenant repenser notre développement, puisque les secteurs classiques sont saturés pour pouvoir absorber le nombre de jeunes et aussi donner du travail aux autres personnes qui ne sont pas dans le système, on va dire, sorties du système éducatif. Comme l'avait dit le président, notre président de la République, Macky Sall, il avait dit que l'économie verte, c'est vraiment un levier pour le Sénégal pour pouvoir enclencher son développement sur de bonnes bases. Donc, les emplois verts, je pense que c'est notre plus-value. Le fait de développer les emplois verts, c'est notre plus-value parce que ça nous permet de régler deux questions cruciales ici au Sénégal. C'est le chômage et aussi la protection de l'environnement. Et si on arrive avec des projets qui puissent protéger l'environnement ou développer des ressources locales tout en créant des revenus et aussi des emplois, on peut être preneur, en fait.
So you've just referred there to Senegal's national strategy for the promotion of green jobs, which has been recognised internationally for the positive socio-economic and environmental results that it's had. What considerations inform the design and development of this national strategy? And what balances or trade-offs did it have to make when it was deciding which sectors to prioritize or support?
Notre stratégie, peut-être que sa valeur ajoutée, c'est parce que c'est une stratégie nationale qui a été très participative dans sa conception, en interpellant toutes les parties prenantes, mais surtout en tenant compte des spécificités des 4 écorégions du Sénégal, parce qu'au Sénégal, on a 4 écorégions, mis à part la région de Dakar. Et comme on sait qu'il y a des contextes géographiques, économiques, la disponibilité des ressources naturelles n'est pas la même d'une région à une autre. Donc, avant d'élaborer la stratégie, il y avait eu des ateliers de partage où la direction des financements verts et des partenariats est allée sur le terrain, rencontrer les acteurs à la base avec qui ils ont discuté. Et c'est de là qu'est partie en fait cette stratégie. Donc, peut-être que c'est ça un de ses points forts, on va dire. Et que grâce à ça, on a pu déterminer que pour que les emplois verts puissent prospérer au Sénégal, il faudrait un peu revoir tout ce qui est aspect juridique et réglementaire. Il faudrait prioriser des filières, comme je l'ai dit tout à l'heure, des filières qui ont un potentiel et qui sont adaptées au Sénégal. Tout ce qui touche les ressources forestières, tout ce qui touche les ressources aquatiques, le recyclage des déchets, aussi les énergies renouvelables, pensant bien sûr à des modes d'énergie alternatives qui consomment moins du bois et du charbon. Donc, à la fin, c'est ce qui a permis en fait d'établir ce document-là. Et les secteurs prioritaires aussi ont été définis en accord avec des défis environnementaux à relever. À la fin de ces rencontres, ateliers, discussions autour des filières et des chaînes de valeur aussi à développer, il y a eu un atelier national de partage du document final qui a été validé. Maintenant, comme compromis, c'est vrai, il y a eu des compromis pour pouvoir faire ce document, mais c'était pas aussi difficile de pouvoir trouver un terrain d'entente puisque dès avant la conception même de ce document, les gens avaient déjà émis les idées et avaient eu des discussions qui leur permettaient de tomber d'accord sur ce qu'il fallait mettre l'accent comme priorité pour le Sénégal.
I think another important aspect to the current pandemic is the way that it has impacted different groups of society in different ways. It obviously affects us all, but it does not affect us all equally. So with this in mind, how has Senegal ensured that its economic recovery plan is also just and inclusive for all workers and also supports other at-risk and vulnerable groups such as women and youth?
Depuis le début de la pandémie au Sénégal ici, le président de la République, M. Macky Sall, avait trouvé des fonds qui lui permettaient en fait de soutenir les familles vulnérables, donc les chefs de famille, des communautés qui avaient vu cesser toute activité professionnelle. Déjà, ça c'était un premier pas. On va dire aux besoins journaliers, puisque pendant le confinement, le Sénégal a eu à expérimenter. Pendant le confinement, les gens ne se déplaçaient plus, alors que la plupart des Sénégalais qui sont dans le secteur informel, c'est toujours vers les marchés. Et le plus grand marché du Sénégal, on sait que ça se trouve à Dakar. Donc, les gens qui étaient retournés au village ont eu à recevoir des appuis, que ce soit des hommes ou des femmes, à travers des schémas communautaires, les mairies, les collectivités territoriales. Ça, c'était un premier acte. Maintenant, de manière beaucoup plus formelle, le président de la République avait demandé à chaque département de formuler un plan de relance qui va lui permettre au final de faire un plan de relance général pour pouvoir enrayer certains effets de la pandémie. Maintenant, au ministère de l'Environnement, avec la direction des financements verts et des partenariats, on va soutenir des projets de promotion d'emplois verts qui regroupent beaucoup plus de femmes et de jeunes dans l'aquaculture, dans le maraîchage bio, dans l'énergie solaire. Et on espère qu'avec ces actions, on pourra consolider leurs activités pour leur permettre d'entamer leur phase de croisière dans leurs activités qui sont déjà existantes et d'augmenter le nombre d'emplois. On pense qu'avec ces projets-là, puisqu'on a rajouté du renforcement de capacité pour ces femmes seront des relais pour d'autres femmes et ces jeunes-là aussi seront des relais pour d'autres jeunes qui pourront s'associer et pouvoir mener une activité verte. Donc, on va dire que bien sûr que le genre est bien pris en compte, particulièrement les femmes et les jeunes qui sont considérés comme des cibles vulnérables, puisque nous, tous les projets emploi vert qu'on a eu à développer, c'était ciblé pour les femmes et les jeunes.
You've spoken before about the role of green innovation and entrepreneurship in promoting new employment opportunities for both youth groups and other vulnerable stakeholders. What steps has Senegal taken to promote such employment opportunities as part of its economic recovery plan? And to what extent should this process be led or supported by the private sector?
Nous, on a dès le début, dès les années 2013, travaillé en partenariat avec des microfinances parce qu'on avait entre 2013 et 2017 un fonds pour promouvoir les projets de promotion d'emploi vert. Ce fonds-là a été placé au niveau de microfinances pour pouvoir prendre en compte en fait et financer des activités de petits projets emploi vert que des femmes ou des hommes allaient soumettre. On a fait ça sur 5 ans, on va dire. Et ça nous a permis, nous, comme phase pilote, d'apprendre beaucoup de l'entrepreneuriat, déjà en tant que tel, comment c'est perçu par les jeunes et les femmes, mais aussi comment mieux encadrer des filières vertes qui sont un peu plus différenciées des filières classiques qu'on connaît, comme vous parlez de secteur informel, comme le commerce, où on peut acheter un produit aujourd'hui, le vendre cet après-midi ou demain et faire son profit. Ce qui est différent pour les projets emploi vert où il y a des temps de maturation, par exemple, pour l'aquaculture, quand on a les alevins, les bassins, tout est déjà mis en place. Il faudrait attendre encore 6 mois avant d'avoir une cohorte de poissons à mettre sur le marché. Et entre-temps, il faudrait trouver à ces jeunes-là des carcans ou des créneaux qui leur permettent d'avoir des revenus en attendant de pouvoir développer leur station aquacole. Et la direction a eu à tester ce genre de financement. Et en partenariat avec des microfinances, ça nous a permis en fait d'interpeller le secteur privé, par exemple par ces banques-là, pour leur dire, écoutez, ce genre de filière, ça marche. Ce genre de projet, ça marche. Quand un jeune ou groupement de femmes vous soumettent des documents de projet par rapport à du recyclage de plastique, par rapport à de la pisciculture, par rapport à de la foresterie, il ne faut pas avoir peur parce que vous voyez que ce sont des secteurs où qu'on peut financer et avoir une rentabilité qui permettent de payer le crédit, de générer des ressources pour les membres et même d'employer d'autres jeunes ou d'autres femmes qui ne sont pas dans le groupement ou qui ne sont pas les entrepreneurs de base qui ont formé en fait le document de projet. Aujourd'hui, même en perspective, on est dans la dynamique d'interpeller de plus grandes banques sur cette question-là des emplois verts et de l'entrepreneuriat vert en essayant de trouver un partenariat qui va nous permettre de mettre en place un fonds dédié dans une banque de la place, grande banque de la place, les banques commerciales, et d'avoir un fonds dédié à l'entrepreneuriat vert. Parce que souvent, on a écho de porteurs de projets verts qui viennent vers nous, qui nous disent que oui, on a écrit notre projet, par exemple, sur le recyclage des déchets plastiques, mais quand on va à la banque, les banquiers ne perçoivent pas l'utilité ou bien la valeur ajoutée de cette activité. On a été à une microfinance. Si aujourd'hui, ce que la direction est en train de construire, comme le fait de mettre en place un fonds dédié à l'entrepreneuriat vers marche, ça nous permettra, nous, d'avoir beaucoup plus de projets verts qui pourront être financés et faire travailler beaucoup plus de femmes dans ce sens-là et de jeunes.
So as a final question, and this relates again to what we have been discussing about creating new employment opportunities for youth, what is the role of education and training in shaping the young minds needed to build a green workforce? And what steps have Senegal been taking to support this?
Je disais que c'est vrai que pour chaque cible, il faut un canal pour pouvoir atteindre la cible. Maintenant, pour la cible du bas âge, ici, par exemple, dans notre département, le ministère de l'Environnement, il y a une cellule qui s'occupe de tout ce qui est formation, sensibilisation dans les écoles primaires, lycées, collèges. Ils font des séances où ils se déplacent vers des lycées avec des techniciens de différentes directions, par exemple un technicien de la direction des aires marines communautaires protégées, un technicien parfois de la direction de l'environnement et des établissements classés, un technicien de la direction des parcs nationaux pour parler de tout ce qui est réserve, protection des animaux, etc. Et quand eux, ils font ces déplacements-là, c'est pour quelque part montrer aux jeunes que bien sûr, il faut protéger l'environnement, mais aussi leur montrer qu'il y a des possibilités de carrière dans ces secteurs-là. On ne sait pas parce que de tout temps, on a entendu parler de juristes, d'économistes, d'enseignants, professeurs qu'il faut tout le temps se lancer dans ces métiers classiques parce qu'aussi on a des défis à relever et ces secteurs-là donnent forcément des opportunités d'emploi. Donc, il faudrait dès à présent, vous commencez à avoir une participation par rapport à ces changements climatiques, par rapport à notre environnement. En fait, on appuie les lycées, les collèges, les primaires où il y a de l'espace dans l'enceinte de l'école à avoir un jardin bio, à avoir un mini potager, à avoir une pépinière, à avoir un bassin piscicole. Et ça permet aux enfants de se familiariser à ces produits-là, en fait, d'avoir aussi une ouverture d'esprit par rapport à ces métiers qui sortent bien sûr petit à petit de l'ordinaire. Ici, par exemple, on parle d'horticulteur. Les gens pensent automatiquement à celui qui vend des fleurs au coin de la rue. Alors que l'horticulture, c'est beaucoup plus pointu que ça et il y a des formations professionnelles pour ça. C'est à eux maintenant d'avoir cette ouverture d'esprit-là, puisque le monde est en train de changer. On parle de changement climatique, on leur explique ce que c'est et il faudrait s'adapter, il faudrait revoir nos modes de développement pour promouvoir mode de production propre et de consommation durable au niveau de ces écoles, lycées, collèges. Et ça donne de bons résultats parce qu'on en voit des gens maintenant qui s'orientent vers des... On a même une université qui s'occupe des questions de développement durable à Bambey. Il y a une autre université, je pense, qui est en construction. Donc, le fait d'avoir une cellule ici au ministère de l'Environnement et du Développement durable qui sensibilise la jeune génération sur ces questions de changement climatique, sur ces questions de résilience, donne petit à petit ses fruits parce qu'il y a des universités même qui se développent sur ça et que des gens sortent aussi pour se former à l'extérieur et revenir travailler au Sénégal.
And finally, we speak to Damien Lankwande. Damien is founder and executive director of GRAD Burkina, a leading green economy research institution in Burkina Faso. Here he describes how green jobs development can support a green recovery in Africa.
You know, in Africa, in West Africa, I know better. In general economic sector, I'm talking about industry or private sector is still running mainly in the way of business as usual. I mean, production processes, energy use, machine, they work mainly with old processes, old machine, etc. And then currently, what they are doing is a subject of huge, a very important pollution and emission of greenhouse gases. So in this situation, for me, green jobs can help for mitigation as a start point. You know, in Africa, the economic sector is mainly characterized by informality. So there is no sometimes an important capacity of investment to buy like big machine, new computers, etc. So the capacity to have green job, even if it's from COVID-19, can help as a start point because for me, it's more cheaper, I can say, in terms of transforming the process of production and also the way they are selling or distributing the good they are producing. We can rely on that because we see after to face the situation of COVID-19, there is a lot of innovation and this innovation sometimes created jobs. Maybe it's not so green that we need, but it's green jobs. So it's for me a start point and African country private sector can learn from this situation. Now they can know it's possible sometimes to work in another way. It's in this way for me, green jobs can be a very, very, very important contribution, can help Africa to have a green recovery from COVID-19.
As a follow-up question then, I would ask, how can governments make this a reality? We know that each country has its own unique set of socioeconomic, environmental and political characteristics, which often define and shape their priorities, as well as any challenges that they may be facing. But what would you say are some of the key core elements that government should look to build their recoveries around, and which at the same time can promote green jobs opportunities?
What we can see in the 5 countries in West Africa in which we conduct this study, we have a lot of innovation that are important in terms of greening economy. We saw application in Ghana, Burkina Faso, Ivory Coast, innovation in terms of e-distribution. Instead of letting people to move to a place to another place so they can buy or sell what they have, their product, without moving to the market. And this kind of application help to reduce movement and then emission of greenhouse gases. In Nigeria, in Senegal, we have artificial intelligence innovation, in Ghana also. And what government can do is to support technically and financially the best green innovation in this area, because we see the innovator, they have idea, they have the will, but sometimes in a specific sector or question, there is no skills, there's no capacity in the area. I want to maybe in the country or in West Africa region. And at this point, government can help have this specific capacity to support the innovator. And also we saw the innovators mainly in the informal sector. They are youth, they don't have much money. What they have is the idea, good idea. So they need finance to develop the idea. And for me, this is the 2 points in which government can help or support green job development in Africa as part of green recovery after COVID-19 pandemic. Identify the innovation and innovators, try to establish the power of this innovation in terms of reducing greenhouse gas emission or reducing human activity impact on the health, support technically and financially the best green innovation that are being identified clearly.
So another big initiative, Green Jobs Initiative, that I understand is taking place in Africa right now is the Great Green Wall, which is trying to create, I believe, 10 million green jobs by 2030. So I'm interested to know how this initiative has been progressing so far. Do you think it's one that can be replicated in either other parts of Africa or other parts of the world as a model for green jobs creation? And what challenges has it presented?
Green Wall Initiative. It's a great important initiative in its objective in terms of greening economy in general and protecting our space from desertification, etc. So it's a model for me and that other country can copy or follow. For me, the main challenges are standards. Sometimes we talk about green economy, green job in Africa, but we don't have actually for most of the country standards to measure what is green or not green. These norms that help to produce good statistics following what we are doing. And this is for me a big challenge also for the Green Wall Initiative. We need to have this standard that can help us make sure what we are creating, job or other things are actually green, and then we are moving on the right way.
I think the standards thing is a very important point, even in terms of the green economy and really measuring progress and what a green economy actually means. So that's a very interesting point. I think looking from a slightly different angle now, relating to some of your more recent work, it's true that parts of Africa have been commended for its management of the COVID-19 pandemic. So I wanted to ask, can its response to COVID-19 and the knowledge and skills that it has clearly demonstrated, can that now fuel and support Africa's green recovery efforts? And can it now perhaps begin to set an example that the rest of the world can follow?
What I can say is, for me, without knowledge and experience, it's difficult to do better. So knowledge from COVID-19 pandemic example and experience, it's for me a lesson of capacity. Most of the time, you said it, Africa countries cannot face this kind of situation. And the pandemic has shown that different phase of the initial analysis. I think the experience gives more confidence to Africans in terms of facing this kind of situation. I talk about natural catastrophe or sanitary crisis, etc. We have to expect to prepare ourselves for other crises. And what is good for us for green economy is that this knowledge and experience show we can reduce greenhouse gases emission by changing our behaviors of production and consumption. Some behaviors in terms of production, consumption, travels can be changed. It's one of the main lessons we can draw for Africa, this capacity, this experience and lesson of capacity.
So you've talked about some of the positive aspects or the positive lessons that Africa can take. How do they make sure that they implement these lessons now moving forwards and that we don't just return to, as you said before, business as usual and the traditional ways of traveling or producing and consuming? How do we ensure that we take advantage of the innovations that have been created? How can we make sure that that happens moving forwards?
In general, I'm optimistic, but we have to work hard with researchers, think tanks, civil society, and international organizations wide If you look very well, it's what we saw in our research from West African country. The main objective or purpose of recovery policy was mainly social and economic. The impact we have on greenhouse gas emission is an indirect impact I can see. So what we have to do is to investigate and show clearly with evidence what was the impact of this measure in terms of reducing our impact on environment, and what is the benefit the different countries can get from taking this initiative, in terms of durability, etc. To find a way and to show the importance of what has been done, the innovation, what they produce in terms of benefits, green job creation. Because sometimes the state, yes, they have the will, but they need to be pushed. And this is what the different stakeholders I was talking about can help to do, to push states with data, evidence that show what is the benefit got from this station, these activities and innovation that help us to reduce our impact on environment. If not, I'm afraid after COVID-19, we return back to the same situation before.
That was The Green Renaissance. Please subscribe on SoundCloud, Spotify, and wherever you get your podcasts to receive new episodes each month. Also, don't forget to give us a rating if you enjoy this series. And if you'd like to learn more about the Green Recovery, the Partnership for Action on Green Economy has developed a series of e-learning courses on key green recovery topics. Just visit www.unccelearn.org and enroll for free today. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you soon.